Hello, this is Jeffery Kin, Executive Director of Sarasota Rising and Living Arts Festival, and I am here for Visit Sarasota's Behind the Masterpiece, where I get to talk to amazing people all around our community and all around our cultural coast, and that includes the Asolo Repertory Theatre and Mr. Peter Rothstein. Peter, hello, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are going to have a great conversation. We have a lot to talk about. There's lots to unwrap here, talking with somebody because you're kind of new to the community. I mean, relatively new. And I got to tell you, from one artistic director to another, it's not for the faint of heart. So as the producing artistic director of the Asolo Repertory Theatre, what do you think the best traits of a artistic director are? What do you think it takes?
You know, by its very nature, theater is collaborative. Mm-hmm. And so I think you have to be up for collaboration. And while you are leading the organization, I think a good artistic director is really quick to share the power, welcome more people to the table. The best idea never comes from one person. The best idea comes from collaboration, and no one knows that better than theater people. And so I think as an artistic director, that's where I tend to lead.
Yeah. Would you call that one of your strengths?
I hope so.
Well, I haven't heard anything different, so I think you're doing. I think you're doing good. So you are what? You're over a year now, right?
A year and a half.
And how are you settling in? How's it going?
I mean, this community is extraordinary. And I love my job. I love the staff, but I also have just fallen in love with Sarasota. And the amount of art and culture here is extraordinary. I cannot think of another city in this country of our size who has the quality and quantity of art and culture that we have here. So I feel so fortunate to call this my new artistic home.
Yeah. Are you going to stay for a while, you think?
I hope so, if they'll have me.
Well, you know, there's a long history of great people that have run that organization. So, so you're the next in line, and we always, of course, wish you the very, very best. You, because I did happen to just see a play too. Actually, I was at your theater twice in this last couple of weeks. So I always feel like being a director and then being a producing artistic director and playwriting are like, really, to some people, oh, that's all kind of the arts. But I know it's completely different parts of your brain. How do you juggle all of that? Because you've been doing all of those things since you've arrived, and I know that's not easy.
It is something I think unique to the theater, right? Often the directors of an art museum, we don't ask them to be a painter. A symphony orchestra, usually the president of the symphony isn't also a conductor or a composer. So it is unique to the theater asking the leader to do both of those things, manage the business and the organization as well as drive the art and be an artist in their own right. For me, actually, that yin and yang is kind of what gets me through the day. There are times where I reach a point where, I can't make any more artistic decisions today. That has too much ego, and math is math. And sometimes I just want to do math. And so to me, that balance is actually really helpful in how I spend my days.
So literally, you're like, yeah, I'm not. But I've written a little bit in my past, and I did find that sometimes you get in that zone, and it comes upon you, and you just gotta grab it, grab the ideas, and grab it while you can, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm dying to talk to you about the 1914 Christmas Truce, or let's see, no, correct me. All is calm. The Truce of 1914. Am I close?
All is calm. The Christmas Truce of 1914.
The Christmas Truce. Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, playwright. I should know better.
No, it's my own fault. You know, I think it was Neil Simon who said, like, titles need hard consonants because that's how people remember them. And the title of this is All is Calm, which is the right title for the show, but there's no hard consonants, so it's a hard one to remember.
Interesting. And you know, it's a fascinating piece. And it is actually for being a piece that is about war. It does. It's a very calm piece. Where did it come from? Where did that come from in your mind?
Yeah, some people have said that it's actually a meditation on peace, and there is something I think meditative about it. I first learned of the Christmas Truce of 1914 through a folk song by John McCutcheon. And to be honest, I thought, oh, that's a lovely piece of hippie fiction. And then a book came out by Stanley Weintraub called Silent Night, which was the first real rigorous investigation into that first winter of the war and this informal truce that happened along the Western Front. And I thought it would make for an extraordinary piece of theater, but I didn't know which form to use, because the climax of the story is the lack of conflict in a way,
Correct.
which doesn't make for great drama.
Yeah.
So I knew it wanted to have a non-traditional form. And I certainly was influenced by the work of Moises Kaufman and Tectonic Theater that does more documentary theater, with shows like The Laramie Project or
Mhm.
Gross Indecency, or The Civilians that does interview-based work. But I'd never seen a kind of a musical documentary in this form before.
Yeah.
But I knew that when I began my research, that if I could tell it in their own words, it would have much more power than any kind of fictitious characters I built around it.
How did you find some of those quotes? How did you find some of those people? Is it through research? Did you, I mean, unfortunately, hit the library and people and read up on books and people's
Yeah,
biographies and
I actually began by just booking a flight to Europe and going to the Western Front, and but over the course of time, I've done research in throughout Germany, Berlin, Dresden, Hamburg, Belgium, Brussels, Ypres, a bilingual city along the Western Front. Research in London and throughout England, as well as Ireland and Scotland. So France, Paris. And so over time, I've done research in most of the major archive centers for World War I throughout Europe.
and
And so,
all those countries were present, and all those accents were there, and yeah, it's a fascinating piece. It's it, is it really is it an opera?
you know,
My first question to you when I saw you outside the theater was, how did you write this? Because in my brain, you write a play in a certain way, but there's so many things happening, and it seems like it's an opera. Is that a
that's interesting. A lot of opera companies have produced the work,
okay?
and a lot of Shakespeare companies have produced the work. There's something kind of Shakespearean about it in its direct address,
Yep.
in its kind of epic. I think Shakespeare really taught us how to tell epic stories through very intimate exchanges,
Yeah.
and so I think there's something Shakespearean about it as well. But I wrote it with a vocal ensemble called Cantus, an extraordinary men's a cappella vocal ensemble based in Minnesota, and I wrote it with them in mind. But you're right, there's more music than non-music throughout the evening. It's quite through composed, we would
And
say.
it's gorgeous. I mean, it really is just it's a beautiful piece. But musically, so now we've talked about you wearing the artistic director hat and the directing hat and the playwright hat, but the depth of music ability was really incredible. How far do your music roots go?
Yeah, I started out in music, so I have a degree
Oh,
in both music and theater.
oh, look at
And
you. Wow.
so
Nice.
I'm often infusing music into the world of plays where there maybe wasn't music before. But I love music. It was my first love. I grew up in a family. I have 10 brothers and sisters, and we all had to play piano.
Wow.
If you wanted to play sports, you had to play piano. Lucky for me, if you played piano, you didn't have to do sports. It didn't go both ways.
Right.
but but my brothers were great athletes, actually. And but no, singing was just part of our broader family. My mom and her siblings loved to sing, and a good family party usually ended up in a sing along.
Wow.
So music is just part of my DNA, I think. But yeah, I have a degree in both theater as well as vocal performance.
Wow, that's fascinating. Has this piece? I know that it's not new, and it has been done around the country and around the world. Is there anything exciting or interesting about this latest version? Is there something unique or in this latest incarnation?
So many of the cast here in Sarasota have done it before. Some of them for, I think, 7, 8 years.
Wow.
So it's really become a part of who they are. And I think audiences can sense that. I mean, the tight harmonies and the
Oh,
musicality without a conductor is quite extraordinary. And but I'm always tweaking it, actually. And this year we added for the first time a projection designer, Greg Emetaz, extraordinary designer who I first worked at the Oslo with Man of La Mancha a couple seasons ago, and he'll be back for my next project, Lady Molly of Scotland Yard. A great projection designer, but he designs mainly for opera. Actually, a number of productions for the Met in New York, and so he's really a fantastic artist. And I thought he would get it because the sensibilities of this piece are in some ways much more operatic than they would lend themselves to the theater.
It was really just a wonderful piece.
Thank you.
You really seem, number one, as everyone can tell, you're a very nice guy. You seem to be just incredibly strong in a kind of silent way. Are there any times, because when you put yourself out there and write things and direct things, you've got to be prepared for the good and the bad and the ugly. Was there ever a time where you kind of doubted yourself on this path of creativity?
Oh, certainly every day at some point, right? Because you're constantly.
I didn't expect you to say every day.
At
I
some
thought
point,
you'd say, well, in 1989, I had.
no. Usually it's when I'm outside of it. So I start rehearsal tomorrow on this world premiere by Ken Ludwig, extraordinary, highly celebrated comic writer.
Oh, yeah. Lend me a tenor, of course, yes.
Yes. Crazy for You, Lend Me a Tenor, Murder on the Orient Express, one of the most, if not the most produced playwright in the English language right now. And he's been a fantastic colleague. But before I start rehearsal, there's always that, oh, do I know what to do? Do I know stage right from stage left? But then when I'm in it, then I'm in it.
Right.
And I don't doubt myself when I'm in it because the room relies on me to not doubt myself.
Right.
I say I don't know a lot. Actually, the great directing teacher Anne Bogart talks about that as directors, we need to say, I don't know. And I think that's true as leaders, too. I think when there's power in saying, I don't know, because it's inviting other people to have an idea.
Right.
And as a director, Jeffrey, we may understand the character at the beginning of the process better than the actor playing them, because you've designed the costume, you've been in the designing what the visual world of the play is, you've done the dramaturgy, the conversations with the playwright, but you hope throughout the process that the actor is now informing you of what the character needs, what their needs are, because they have a visceral experience with that character that we'll never have. So I do think it's that balance of being a leader when they need you to be a leader, but also having the vulnerability to say, I don't know, and recognize where my power stops and allowing others to step into their power.
Yeah. And make discoveries. In my early years, I was directing a piece that I had written, which I know is never the thing to do. And I was talking to one of the actors and I was explaining something. And he goes, Jeffrey, you're giving me all of my experiences. And I went, I am. Meaning I immediately understood that I was feeding him things and he needed to make discoveries. And I was giving him all of his discoveries. That was a great lesson for me.
Great lesson.
To step back and let the actor figure some things out and maybe fail a little bit,
And for me, I often was on the opposite side where I wanted to give all the actors all the freedom in the world. And a great actor, Barbara June Patterson, she was a high school drama teacher and taught John Malkovich and Gary Sinise and the guys who eventually formed Steppenwolf. And I was directing her just in a, kind of an industrial small theater piece. And around the third day, she pulled me aside and she said, Peter, you're the director for a reason. And we need you to direct. And she was very gracious. She just said, you're giving us all the freedom, but that freedom feels like a vacuum. and no one can be creative in a vacuum. So that is that balance, right? Of how do you create enough of the world that the actor feels supported. They feel like they're not making decisions in the vacuum. You're building a world, but to not hyper control the situation and not allow them to be an expression as well.
Yeah, interesting. I was actually did the reading of the 10th anniversary of the Laramie Project at the Oslo with Michael Edwards, and somebody came up to him and said something, and I'll never forget it because I've used it a million times. He was like, "Well, thank you very much. You may take off your helpful hat. I've got this." And I was like, "Classy, smart." He was like, yes, you can push me this far, but then you can take off your helpful hat and let me and let me do my thing. I'll never forget it. You talked a little bit about going into rehearsal. So 66 years, it's got to be kind of cool to be there and creating that kind of an atmosphere for a company like that. You're going into rehearsal? Is there something exciting that you have planned for this season? Something that you're excited about?
Yeah, so much of the season I'm thrilled about. I just came from a luncheon celebrating a coworker who's celebrating his 56th year with the Oslo and is retiring on January 1st.
Wow.
And we welcome back a lot of the old timers to this luncheon, folks who are working here in the 60s and the 70s. And they shared so many stories and we laughed and I thought, my theater has changed. The technology has changed so drastically over the past 60 years. But ultimately, what folks remember and what they continue to tell stories about are the people and the relationships. And that's what hasn't changed in our art form. For theater to happen, live bodies need to share space. Actors need to share space and time with an audience. And technology can never replace that. But there's a lot I'm excited about. We're doing so many projects the Oslo's never done before. Actually, there's only one play in our season, the brilliant Brian Friel play, Dancing at Lughnasa, that Joe Dowling is directing. That the Oslo's done before, but that's the only of the 7 productions we're doing this season that we produced before. So lots of new work. And new work to Sarasota audiences, and a balance of, you're always finding that balance of comedies and dramas and classic work and contemporary work, trying to
please everybody. It never works.
Please everybody, the diversity of stories. So often our marketing department will say, Peter, what's the one idea for the season? What's the one umbrella it all fits inside of? And my response is always, I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to stretch as far as possible. I'm trying to tell as diverse of stories as possible. I'm trying to actually not have it all be one idea. We go to the theater to watch someone's lived experience other than our own.
Yeah.
And so my goal is always a diversity of styles, a diversity of narratives, diversity of voices, rather than one driving universal idea for a given season.
So for folks who are listening who aren't from our area, I believe we take one thing for granted with Asolo Rep, and that is the rep aspect. And when you brought up technology, you guys do something that not very many theater companies do anymore. You probably know that better than I, where you run your shows in repertory. So every other week, there's something new on your stage. That's fascinating. Do you love stepping into that kind of an atmosphere?
It's thrilling because, as you mentioned, that was the norm for the regional theater movement when the Oslo began. The Oslo was at the forefront of the regional theater movement, along with the Guthrie in Minneapolis and Arena Stage in DC and the Alley Theater in Houston. Those were formed as repertory companies where you'd have one acting company, and they would have a collection of plays, and every night the stage crew would stay after the show and change over the set to the next. And most of the organizations across the country have dropped the repertory model. It's very expensive. It's also very challenging as we're doing more culturally specific and diverse shows. It makes having one resident company a challenge. So we're doing less rep this year. Dancing at Lughnasa and Goodnight Oscar, the regional premiere of Goodnight Oscar, will be in rep. But it's something that I I love and I have great affinity for. And we're putting together next season, and repertory will definitely be a part. Will be a
Okay.
part of the
Well,
season as well.
that was a great segue, because I know as an artistic director that you're already thinking and looking and gathering information and rights for next season, so that you can get all that into the rights organizations. Is there anything that you're excited about as you're planning ahead that you can drop some ideas or hints of where your brain might be going for next season?
Yeah, we're doing so much planning, even 2 and 3 years out. And one thing I'm hoping to do at the Asolo Rep during my time here is to do more new work, more world premieres, more partnering with writers, composers, lyricists, as well as producers who are looking to launch their work out in the provinces, so to speak,
Right.
before bringing that work into New York. And so we're working on a number of things right now: regional premieres, world premieres, by exciting writers, as well as work that we hope will launch here and then move forward to life in New York. But there are so many artistic directors that I know really want to do all of that planning on their own. But I do that selection by committee. I always want other ideas at the table, other folks inside the organization. I stand up in front of the full staff and say, any ideas, please bring them to me. And we have people work in the paint shop who brought up titles that are plays that end up on the main stage, because again, it's a collaborative art form. And I see a lot of theater and I read a lot of plays, but I want to be always inclusive, to think, what are stories that are resonating with other people inside the organization.
Right. And times change too, as well. I love the fact that sometimes you can produce something that was original. I'll never forget. I produced the production of Dear World, which is the musical version of The Mad Women of Shiloh, right during the oil spill. Of course, I didn't plan it that way, but there was the big oil spill in the Gulf, and to have a musical that was all about oil at the same time, and I'm like, and a part of me went, "Gosh, you know what? I think this is resonating now better than it did when it came out in 1968 or something." I mean, I think there's something fascinating about some of the, what we call older shows, and what they say now about, our current state of affairs.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of great writing,
Yeah.
is that those investigations into humanity, into who we are as people, those great writers are tapping into something that transcends time, and that's part of our job, is to say, what of those stories resonate now, because the theater only exists in the now.
Yeah.
It's not a museum art form.
Right.
And even sometimes folks will say, oh, it shows us how far we haven't come, but that's not reason enough to do a show. You do a show because there's something about at the center of that play that's telling the truth, and that you want your audience to look in the mirror and say, how does the truth of this moment, I don't care if it was written 50 years ago or 500 years ago, how is the truth of that moment alive in the world we live in today?
And won't it be interesting, because we won't be here, about some of the pieces that we are dealing with now? Do they have a shelf life? I mean, will they be another Shakespeare? I wonder if future selves would be fascinated, because Shakespeare didn't realize that they were writing things that people would be doing, I don't think, in 500 years. I wonder who today will have a voice.
Absolutely. Or even just within decades, right? The world is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
We're producing Nilo Cruz, Pulitzer Prize winning Anna in the Tropics this year.
It's very exciting.
Such a beautiful play set in a cigar factory in Ybor City.
Yeah.
100 years ago. But at the center of that play is the debate around the advancing technology. And they're bringing in machines to replace the workers in the cigar factory. And I look at what's happening with AI today, and we're having that exact same conversation about what can a machine do that a human being cannot, and vice versa. More importantly, vice versa. What can a human being do that a machine or that AI or technology can't? And that's at the heart of this play. The play's only 30 years old, but already it's finding new ways to speak to the modern world.
I love those. I love how sometimes those stories take you on a journey. I mean, there is something great about live theater, and what a treasure Asolo Rep is. And I think you've been here now and making a wonderful mark on our community. So we got to wrap up. Of course, I told you we could talk for hours if we wanted to. So if I'd love to ask this question just every once in a while. So this is off the top of my head. I hope you appreciate it as much as I do. If you were not in the theater, what would you be doing?
To be honest, I can't really imagine life outside of the theater, and no one would hire me. But I think I'd be an architect.
So structural form, structure.
Structural form, and because there's something very similar, I think, about an architect. You are crafting a piece of art, but you're looking at human psychology and human behavior of how they interact with that structure.
Yeah.
So I actually think for me, it's the closest to being a theater director would be an architect, because it's such a deep investigation into the human spirit and human behavior through the lens of art.
Well, don't get any ideas, because you have a lot of work to do in the next few years. Thanks so much for taking the time, Peter, and talking with us. And I hope you enjoyed your time with us. And who knows, maybe we'll wrap back up again and have another chat soon. Would you like that? I think I would.
I'd love that.
I think we have more to talk about.
Indeed.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this has been Jeffery Kin with Sarasota Rising with Visit Sarasota's Behind the Masterpiece. We love our conversations with our arts practitioners, and we appreciate your listening and watching. Take good care. Thanks for being in our audience. I'm Jeffery Kin, Sarasota Rising Living Arts Festival. If you'd like more information about the incredible work that Visit Sarasota does, please visit them at visitsarasota.com. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience.